Good morning, everyone. We're really pleased to be here this morning and share with you the results of this fourth exploration of audience engagement and revenue enhancement that have occurred over the last decade. And this one is called the Patron Growth Initiative. I'll explain the other four titles for you quickly so you can see how these evolved. As Russell mentioned, this study grew out of a finding from the Audience Growth Initiative, which was conducted by Oliver Wyman a couple of years ago, and on which we reported at the last two conferences. The first one, the findings of it; the second report, the implementation of it. To explain the title, as Russell promised I would, it's impossible to explain how we got here. It was very late at night. But the Audience Growth Initiative became known as the Churn Study. The implementation of the Churn Study was titled, Is It Butter Yet? Okay, so now I think that's long enough on the explanation. One of the findings in the Churn Study was that there was a significant relationship between frequency and tenure of attendance and both sales and contributed revenue. So the 9 marketing directors that did the Churn Study said, we think there's something here, but we're not comfortable moving on to explore that without holding hands with our development counterparts. So a new team of 16 marketing and development directors got together, selected Kate Prescott to do the research, and initiated the Patron Growth Initiative, whose purpose is to look at this relationship of what, in fact, creates engaged audiences and maximizes long-term total revenue growth. The 16 people who were involved in guiding this study with Kate, she has a list of those on one slide coming up here, because we want to make sure all 16 of those folks get credit. They worked hard on this study. And as Russell mentioned at the end of Kate's presentation in part 2, we'll get 3 glimpses into what resonated at 3 different orchestras and what they're either doing about it or thinking about doing based on the findings of this. I also want to mention that although the participants come from the largest budget orchestras, we're already convinced that the findings you'll hear about here are applicable to any size budget, or many of the findings are applicable to any size budget and any size community. And for that reason, we're doing 2 follow-up sessions tomorrow at 9:30. One for marketing and development directors of Group 1 and 2 orchestras, and the other one for managers and directors at the smallest budget orchestras, so we can dig deeper from both of those perspectives. I mentioned, or Russell mentioned, 4 research studies. There is one that precedes the Churn Study, which was the League's audience motivation research, which came up with the concept of the frequency spiral. So if any of you can remember the frequency spiral, you're long-time members of this field. And in fact, that spiral has really provided a basis for a lot of the information we've learned since then. It's interesting to note that the principal or the researcher on this Patron Growth Initiative, Kate Prescott, was a principal analyst on the audience motivation research. So there's a symmetry and a continuity to this that really has made it powerful. And that's enough of an introduction. I want to turn you over now to Kate, who's going to share the findings and recommendations. Kate Prescott.
Good morning. Can you hear me, please? I hope. Okay. I'm delighted to be here to talk about this study. It was a very massive endeavor, and it's great to be able to share some of it with you. I also wanted to say this is a really big room, and these are small charts, and they're filled with data, so please don't worry about trying to read it all. I'll try to focus you, and this will be on the League's website, so you don't have to worry about that. And as Jack mentioned that this is really an outgrowth of the Churn study, which was more marketing and tactical. We look at this as much more strategic and organizational. And so with that, just to get right into it, the purpose of this really is to help orchestras to grow their lifetime value. And we want to do that because we know that patron-generated in revenue is critically important to long-term success. This is a year-long effort. We did data mining, qualitative research, and quantitative research. And we started by developing a database of over 500,000 patron records across the 9 orchestras. It accounted for $930 million over 5 years. And for this project, the patrons were defined as households who had purchased subscription classical tickets or donations in a 5-year period from 2005 to 2009. So it's no pops, no summertime, that sort of thing, and it's all donations with the exception of future bequests. And that's actually where the name came from, patron. We wanted to get away from the donor versus customer sort of labels, and so we're talking about patrons. For every record, we included all of their classical transactions, concerts, tickets, and dollars, and all of their donations for each of those 5 seasons. Following extensive data mining there, we did an extensive survey among 13,000 of those households, which we then took all of those results and married them to the database. So we had an aggregate database of both behavioral measures and attitudes, perceptions, demographics, and the like. As Jack mentioned, we had 9 orchestras participate, and I really want to thank them, particularly these people that are listed here on the slide. They were extremely generous with their time, their data, and their enthusiasm, so we really appreciate all of that. And special thanks to Jack McAuliffe. Without his vision, his insights, and his ongoing care, this sort of massive project wouldn't have happened, I don't think. Okay, so I'm going to start with a little bit about the data mining. And we essentially started this with a basic conceptual question about sort of what are the patron commitment clusters that we have out there, and what are the pathways that get people to where they go. So if you think about theoretically, we have concert commitment, right? Ticket buying across the bottom from low to high, and we have donor commitment from low to high. So we know there's that low group. They don't go, they don't give a lot, and we know there's that high group who's giving a lot, going a lot, but we don't have a really good sense about the clusters in between, nor do we have a really good idea of how they get to where they go, or don't go in some cases, right? So we started with that, and we used actually cluster analysis with all of those behavioral, transactional data points and donor data points, put them into a model and to look at what the actual relationship was between those two things. And the modeling actually came up with 7 clusters that look fairly familiar, I guess, right? And we had 2 that were essentially buyer-donor clusters, extreme patrons and loyal subscribers. There were 3 that were primarily buyer groups that don't donate. And then there were 2 donor groups, loyal donors and these one-time uncommitted donors that essentially donate but don't really go. And so just going back to the Churn study, that group, that one-time uncommitted buyer, that's essentially what the Churn focused on. We're going to talk more about these segments, but just to give you an idea, for an example of some of the differences, that extreme patron group, actually the model threw them out. It said this does not compute because they were extremely extreme. So for instance, for ticket buying, 95% of them had attended a concert between 2005 and 2009, and they had spent about $9,000 on those tickets, and 60% of them had donated, and on average had donated $35,000. Yeah. So in contrast to those one-time uncommitted buyers, they all went over that 5-year period, and they spent a total of $163. And only 4% gave at a total of an average of $16. And just one other group to look at, that loyal donor group. This is a group so that only about a quarter of them had attended any concert in that 5-year period and only spent $136 on concerts, but all had given on an average of $4,000. So very different behavior, both on a ticket buying base and a donor base. And so we wanted to learn more about these people. One was, how big are these groups? There's going to be some sad charts. So the first, this is very similar to Churn in that database, 65% of those people fell into this one-time or uncommitted buyer group. They literally went once or maybe twice in 5 years. And what you see on the right-hand side, essentially there were groups about equal sizes that showed up in the database only once and never again. This is sort of an offshoot from that, but one of the things we looked at, reported buying, reported purchasing versus their actual in the database, and it was very clear that people go less than they think they go, but more than you know they go. So that's a database issue and a perceptual issue, but generally speaking, if somebody says they're a light user, they are. Anyway, so they represented 65 of the base, and then you can see these other segments are much smaller, down to that extreme patron, which is 0.4, not 4%, 0.4, less than 1/2 of 1%. In terms of the size of that group. The first thing, we looked at these segments a lot. The first thing we looked at was revenue contribution, and less than 10% of the households, those two bottom segments there, loyal subscribers and extreme patrons, represented almost 3/4 of all revenue. That 65% of the people that you're spending lots of money to bring in, marketing expense, and that represented 7% of the total revenue of the base. We also looked at that in terms of separating out ticket buying and gifts, and that same very small percentage of households represented 64% of all tickets, and only less than 15% represented over 90% of all revenue. You can see the top, if you look at the 90% of all gifts, I'm sorry. So you can see the one-time buyers, the lapsed subscribers, and the newer subscribers, multi-buyers. Those three groups, essentially that non-buyer groups, those are non-donor groups that I mentioned, they literally accounted for less than 5% of total gifts. There are also age effects going on here, so that if you look at this, 64% of all households, 64% of all revenue came from households that are 65-plus households, and almost 90% came from households that are 55 years and above, right? So you can look at percentage households, under 50, that's 30, 40, over 40% are under 50, but they're contributing less than 15% of revenue, which sort of suggests a problem here. We know that donations are extremely important to total revenue, and when we looked at that revenue, that $930 million, 63% of it came from donations and 37% from ticket sales, and that was very similar across all orchestras. It ranged a little bit, but so we know donations are critical. We also know that donations are hard to come by, and part of that is a mental attitude. We asked people their likelihood of donating to their orchestra in the next year, and only that loyal subscriber group did the majority say, yes, I'm very likely to donate to that orchestra. Even the extreme patrons and the loyal subscribers were at about 50%, yeah, I'd be very likely. And when you look at the other groups, they're very unlikely to be in that top box of positive intention. And in fact, they're not even neutral. they're inclined not to donate. You have 60, 71%, 80% are saying, I'm not too likely or not at all likely to donate to my orchestra in the next year. Which is why it's so hard to get donors, right? Yes. And another thing that we found is that donations lag attendance by 10 or more years. So on average, 38% of all of the patrons in the database had donated to their orchestra, and it takes over 10 years to reach that penetration level. And for example, the group that had been attending for 30 to 39 years, we asked when was their first time they donated, and it was 16 years ago. So in that case, it could have taken, on average, 15 to 25 years before they started donating. So and it's same without those same groups. Somebody who's been attending for 40 plus years, their average was they started donating 18 years ago. And you can then look at that sort of relationship and its effect on average revenue, average gifts, average ticket buying behavior, and that's what this data is. And if you see the red and the green lines, those are donations and ticket sales by years of attendance. And they track really closely, one thing. And the other thing that you notice is they're really at low levels until you get to that 10-year point where they start to climb. And you don't see donations outpacing ticket sales until you're at the 30-year mark or more. And that's when you see the revenue line, right? The revenue line jumps up because of increased donations way out in the future. So that's enough of those charts. But we did see a little silver lining here. As Jack had mentioned, in Churn, there's clearly a relationship between frequency and tenure, and here we see the relationship between tenure and donations. And so what we wanted to do is spend more time looking at how all of those things work together. And so here is a chart. It's a little complicated, but this essentially classifies people based on their attendance tenure over the course of history with their orchestra, their frequency of attendance over the 5-year period. And what you can see is there's obviously a significant relationship between tenure and donations, frequency and donations, and the combination is even more dramatic. So if we look at this just for a minute, looking from front to back, tenure, we define people as very short tenure. They'd been with their orchestra less than 5 years, short, 5 to 9 years, and so forth. And the frequency, very low frequency, they went once, so that's all those one-time uncommitted buyers are in that little box there. Low frequency and up through higher frequency. Higher frequency was an average of 15 plus times. Actually, it was defined as 15 plus times. Their average was actually more like 30 plus concerts in that given time period. What you see then is then thinking about looking at tenure, from the very low end to the high. Those bars go up as you go up in tenure. But what you do notice that with low frequency, even long tenure has little likelihood on the percentage of people who donate, right? So I've been going once in 5 years for the first time, and 4% of those donated. I've been going to this orchestra for 25 years, or 20 years, and I went once in the last 5 years, and I've only 10% have donated. It's not until you move up in frequency that it really kicks in. And what that suggests is that frequency is actually trumping tenure, right? And it says that if you can increase frequency, it can shorten that lag time that we just saw in the other chart, right? And it can shorten it across any tenure group. So if you look at short-term tenure people, 5 to 9 years, even that group is increasing their likelihood of donations with frequency, and it gets particularly high when you get high frequency. Just to give you a further example of that, this is the same chart looking at '09 data, '09 frequency. So now you're looking at people on a more frequent basis than over the 5-year period. It's going once a season, 2 to 4 times in a season, 5 to 10, and you can see the lines going back here, right? They're even more dramatic. So it jumps even higher, their likelihood of donating, the more frequently they go in any one season. And you can also sort of see this spot right at short tenure, so I have to be going for several years, and at medium frequency, and you see that 57, right? It jumps up right there at that point, so that must be one of those sort of, sweet spots that you want to look at, right? So, recommended actions coming out of this. We had several basic recommendations, and again, sort of at the more strategic level. And one was to drive frequency and tenure through compelling concert experiences. And that looks like one of those duh charts. But I think the key word there is compelling concert experiences. And why do I say that? It's because that's how decisions are made. We asked, what was your primary reason for going to the most recent concert that you went to? It's driven by the programs. People go to hear programs they think they're going to enjoy, the composers they like, the compositions they like, the soloists they like, right? It's about the concerts. We spent a lot of time talking about social events. It's far less of a driver than the concerts itself. And you can look at that with subscriptions too. And it's interesting, this contrasts and compares loyal subscribers with those newer subscribers who are future-based, right? We want to build that base. And newer subscribers are much more programmatically driven than your loyal subscribers. Loyal subscribers still care about the seats. If you look at the bottom 3 bars with the red circles, the newer subscribers were much more likely to say, I bought a subscription because I wanted to get tickets for the concerts I really wanted to see, and I could pick my own. And by the way, I didn't have to pick as many, which is a little problematic there in terms of that frequency thing. But it also says, well, you need to give them concerts they want to see, right? And they are also much more discount driven. And you could see that throughout the data. It wasn't just here. You could see when you looked at these newer subscribers and single ticket buyers in general that they're much more prone to looking for discounts, and it really feels like excessive and predictable discounting is detrimental and is not the way to increase frequency, at least in the long-term sense. Getting back to programming, so what elements help you decide which concerts you're going to go to or not? Again, composers and composition far outweigh soloists and specific conductors, and that's primarily particularly if the two soloists and conductors aren't the big names, yo-yo kind of thing. That would change that model a little. But generally speaking, we see this in lots of data. It's about the composition and the composers more so than other elements, and that was very similar across all markets. So when we look at programming and people's interest in classical music, we gave them all of these periods of classical music and examples of numerous composers within each of those periods, and asked them to rate their interest in these periods on a scale from 4, I love it, to, or 1, I love it, to 4, I don't care for it at all. And you see a bell curve with a skew here, and so the primary area of real affection in terms of classical music goes from classical to the Russian Romantic period, right? People love it, or almost everybody likes those periods very much. And then you have a slight drop from Russian Romantic to 20th century classic, and actually it's a huge drop. And then the next drop from 20th century to 20th century modern is, from a statistical standpoint, off the charts. So you have just about 1/4 of the population of classical music attenders really saying they enjoy 20th century modern and contemporary, and you have that same number who are saying they don't care for it at all. This also holds across the clusters that we're looking at. Here, this sort of turns that chart sideways, so you're looking at each of the clusters' data points, and so you can see, extreme patrons, loyal subscribers have slightly higher interest in general in classical music periods, and it tends to drop slightly as you go further down the line, but the pattern is exactly the same. The 4 periods that everybody find most appealing are the Romantic and classical periods. Then there's this little break where you see then 20th century classics and Baroque, and then a big break across all groups to 20th century modern and contemporary. This isn't to suggest that you don't do contemporary. It's about eyes wide open, right, and thinking about what that all means. And one of the things we asked people was what would make concerts more enjoyable, because that's what it's all about, right? And what's really important is that, yes, people want concerts that are aligned with their preferences, but it's about getting people into the music. If you look at the top, it's about learning to listen for different elements of the music, brief explanations from the stage, know more about the context of compositions, learning about pieces in advance, and then along with that, you see my personal preferences. More pieces from the periods I like, lesser known pieces from familiar composers, and both of those I think are really interesting because they're much higher than just straight familiar music. This is not about playing Beethoven's Ninth all the time. People want to be engaged and brought along in the music that they like. And I think it's also interesting to look at the bottom, the blue zone. We spend an awful lot of time thinking about what we can do on ancillary things around the concert experience. So let's invite people to private receptions. Let's have more social activities with the other concert goers. We need screens. The hall is too formal. And frankly, those are not what's driving what people are doing. It's about the music and getting people more into the music. That's really, really the driver. So, more compelling concerts is one. And this pattern held across all of those clusters. Regardless of, which is also interesting, regardless of how into it I am, I want to get more into it, which is a really good thing. It's a really strong thing to say that, if we bring people and give them context, they're just going to get deeper into the art form. 2, build stronger brand relationships. We spent an awful lot of time looking at the relationships that people see and have their perceptions, their relationships with your orchestras, and I'd like to share some of that data with you. So here are some scales that we did where it's essentially a 5-point hedonic. We asked people to rate their relationship with their local orchestra, one of these 9, in terms of deserves my support, doesn't deserve my support, needs my support, doesn't, plays what I like, plays what they like, and so on. And when you look at this, this overall pattern would suggest really weak relationships. From a research standpoint, it's extremely important to focus on that top box, where it's that bright yellow, because that top box in any sort of measure, I definitely will attend, I love that concert, that sort of thing, that's what turns the dial, and that's what's really important. And if you look at that, we have 15% of this total audience saying they deserve my support, less saying they need my support, 9% saying treats me like a valued patron. If you get down to the bottom ones, actually, more people agree that it's difficult to fit you into my life than easy, and cares about me as a person. No, not really, only cares about my money. Similarly, it's hot in here. Yes, people would miss you. They really do like you. They would miss you if you went away. And people also generally say they haven't had a problem with their orchestra. But if you look at feelings of closeness, they're really weak. Think about them often? No, they're more likely not to think about you, right? Never think about, so you're not on the radar screen. Feel like a part of the orchestra's family, more like an outsider. Feel like I know who they know who I am. No, I feel like they don't know me at all. So really sad in terms of, people's sort of general perceptions of them and their orchestra. And this is brands, it's just like how you would treat a regular product and how you feel about them. And so we wanted to take this a little further and look at it by all of those clusters, right? Because this is the world, and the world is an aggregate. So we did. We broke them up and looked at them by clusters. And here's, for instance, respect and, say, good customer service. You have almost 90% of people agreeing that their orchestra is a highly respected organization. The vast majority are saying, the large majority are saying they haven't had a problem with the orchestra. The key here is, those are straight lines. So that means there's no relationship between those variables and commitment and loyalty. Because those one-time buyers are saying, yeah, I respect them just as much as those extreme patrons are, and they're coming once, and they're not giving any money, right? So and I think that goes back to the issue that you heard earlier about, we focus a lot on quality and competence, and that's not enough, right? If you take a look at some of the other factors like care and reciprocity, now you see, I switched the order of the groups too. Now they're going in the other direction. If we go from the least committed to the most committed segments, now you start to see these really significant trend lines. Treats me like a value patron. Look at that red line. That is a straight, direct correlation. Does more for me than I do for them. Is responsive to my needs. Those are really increasing with levels of commitment and loyalty to the organization and the brand. Cares about me as a person and feels like I know I feel like they know who I am, are low in general, but again, they increase with patron commitment. See the same thing in terms of closeness and attachment. I would miss them more. I would miss them terribly if I went away. That's high overall, but increases even more with commitment. And again, if you look at some of these, look at that red line. Feel strongly connected to the organization, going from 16 to the reverse, 61% as you climb that commitment ladder, right? Fits easily into my life. This is another one that has a really strong relationship with loyalty and commitment. And I think this is one of the ones that we forget about a lot. I'm not going to show the data, but we spent a lot of time looking at when people come, when they start going more often, when they start to decline. And you fit into their lives rather than the other way around. It is, I started going because I moved to the city and I love classical music, and then the kids came along, and then the kids left, and then so we started going, and then tuition came along for college, and then mom moved in, and my husband lost a job. It was all about them, in their lives. And so it's really important to understand that you fit into their lives, and you have to figure out how to do that. The other interesting thing about this is that all of these same perceptions tie directly to desire to support. Deserves my support, needs my support, very eager to support, increase right with those levels. So one-time uncommitted buyers, lab subscribers are very unlikely to be eager to support you. We took this a little further, and we asked people to, on an open-ended basis, describe their relationship with their orchestra. We said, you and your orchestra are people, you're in a relationship. What is that relationship? Talk to us about it. And a lot of people went, oh my God, I can't do that. I got it was open-end, and I got a lot of question mark. But 8,000 people actually gave a response to this question, and I coded all of them. And many nights, and developed a typology of brand relationships. And we had a number of different types of relationships. We had partnerships that might be in marital terms or insider. They were connections to you specifically, the musicians, your organization, family member, close friends. these compartmentalized partnerships that were fans and admirers, student-teacher, lots of different acquaintance relationships, casual friends, distant acquaintances, cousins, one-night stands. And there are also negative, or what we would call disjointed relationships, love, hate, or damage. And I'm not going to go through them all. I'm just going to show you, like I said, there's a whole typology you can look at, but I want to show you a few examples of these. So these partnerships, when you looked at and you read these comments about their relationship with their orchestra, they were characterized by deep closeness, long-term commitment, intimacy, growth, or warmth, deep affection. They were rewarding and giving and mutually beneficial. So like a marital example was, it's like my beloved wife. Or a family member, I think of the orchestra as a parent. It is nurturing, soothing, comforting, challenging, educational, wise, and welcoming. A cherished friend, warm, constant, clever, and talented, no explanation required. She's always there. This idea that this person is there for me and this give and take came in all of these. And inextricably bound to one another, one of the most significant relationships of my life. I mean, so these were amazing to read. I mean, I brought tears to my eyes, frankly, when I read them. And it was wonderful to see. But that was contrasted with different types of relationships as well. So these compartmentalized partnerships are more about pride and support and awe and admiration, but they're much more one-sided, sort of people looking to the orchestra. So somebody would say something like, this orchestra is Cincinnati's pride and joy. It's wonderful to know they're one of the best in the nation. Or admire and respect from a distance, but with limited interaction, similar to an elected official that I respect and have heard speak. I don't know. Admire, elected official, I don't know. I don't know. Excellent teacher and willing student, so there were a lot of, they're going to lead and I can follow. But it wasn't, these weren't close two-way relationships. Then there was a whole area of these acquaintanceships that were close or comfortable but not close, likable but limited, distant. And I think, actually, if I had done a content analysis of this question, distance was probably the word that came up most often throughout this whole thing. But so these ranged from comfortable and likable but distant to inconvenient, impersonal, and even transactional. Examples, like a distant cousin I rarely see. We have fun when we see each other, but I don't feel the need to make any special effort to see them more often. We all have cousins like that, don't we? When it happens, it happens. I look to hook up occasionally and not have a steady relationship. Like cutting it off. To worse, someone who looks familiar and I might even know their name, but we don't talk. And I thought I found these most troubling. Business relationships. Business relationship, that's it. If you put on good concerts I like, I'll go. And people talked about it. It's just exchange. That's all it is, right? And then sort of in the negative realm, these were characterized by disappointment and frustration on the consumer's part. They considered the relationships cold and impersonal, one-sided. Often saw the orchestra as spoiled, self-absorbed, or out of touch. It's a love-hate relationship. For 4 years, we asked to change our seats to the aisle of our row and never received a response. Right, so that was the disappointment. Reminiscent of my first wife. It's not going well, is it? Right. Beautiful but haughty, does as she pleases with no regard for my opinion and freely spends my money without asking. It's not good, not good. Yeah, not good. A relationship implies reciprocity. The orchestra treats me as though I was an anonymous one among thousands of others, not flattering and not very friendly. And dysfunctional. The orchestra is all about the orchestra and nothing beyond that. So we then looked at where do we stand in terms of these relationships. So we tallied them all up, and I essentially did a brand relationship map. So I looked at them in terms of two dimensions, this closeness versus distance, and the strength of the bond, weak versus strong. And just 25% of all of these relationship descriptions were in that upper quadrant, where it's a strong, close relationship. Close friends was the highest at 15%. You can see marital was 4%. The vast majority, the largest group, I mean, fell into this sort of middle, distant area. Acquaintances were 32%, and that could, again, range from close acquaintance, or a likable acquaintance, to a very distant acquaintance. If you look at the bottom quadrant, 16% were actually in that negative, disjointed category, and then we had about that same percent in this compartmentalized partnership group. What's interesting, too, is when you look at that, and you look at all of this data by donors versus non-donors, donors are twice as likely to be in that upper quadrant, right? And in contrast, non-donors are much more likely to be in this acquaintance area, or even potentially in the negative area. That held across segments, too. If you look at the clusters that we're talking about, here, if you look at the red line, it increases with commitment to the organization. So partnerships have a positive correlation with commitment. These acquaintanceships have a negative, right, going down. And it also held within segments. So for instance, in that extreme patron group, I said 2/3 of them had made a donation. There's this other third who hadn't. And if you look at those two groups, the ones who had were twice as likely to say we have a partnership relationship than the people who aren't giving. And that's, that's one of those questions. So why are those loyal subscribers, that whole group of loyal subscribers, why aren't they giving? And why do we have these patrons who go to 49 concerts a year and don't give? And I think part of it is this, it's that they don't feel that connection that others in their sort of cluster do. So, number 3, develop more patron-relevant donor strategies. There has been much more work, I believe, done in the area of marketing and research in the area of marketing and ticket buying than there has been on the development and donor side. And so we spent an awful lot of the survey work looking at donors. And I'm not going to go through all of that data now, but I did want to just share a few of those findings. Just backing up for a minute, if you look at, I think, most orchestras, the approach to donor development is very benefit-driven. We have that hierarchy, right? We have the levels, and the more you give, the more you go up that benefit ladder. And so we wanted to look at benefits and how people feel about them. And while orchestras are very benefit-driven and are very benefit-focused, consumers are actually about support. They give you money to support you. 75% said a 5, I do it primarily to support my orchestra. Only 1% said it was to obtain benefits. And it was also interesting that this pattern held across all of those clusters, the exact same pattern, and regardless of levels of giving. So we looked at people who gave less than $100, and we looked at people who gave over $5,000, and it was the exact same pattern. 75% of them are saying that I give primarily for support. And if you look further at that, we asked people, so what are your primary reasons for donating? And here you can see in the red zone, I donate because the orchestra is an important community asset. I love classical music and I want to support it. I think the orchestra is great and it deserves my support, right? So it's that whole support-driven aspect. And if you look down towards the bottom, to obtain specific benefits is at it's dead last, for tax purposes. Benefits are worth the donation. It really is about support and ensuring the future. And this also held very much across segments. getting further into sort of donations and why people donate and how their head works, we also asked people several open-ended questions. Here's that lifetime, that life cycle chart. I use this a lot, and somebody just presented it this morning. I forgot. I'm sorry. Anyway, so what we did was say, when did you first decide to make a donation? At what point did you increase your donation? At what point did you, if you did, make a significant gift? And at what point, if you did you stop donating or cut back? And again, these were open-ended questions that we looked at on an individual basis. And so just as an example, an extreme patron said, we gave first because we wanted to support the orchestra. We gave more when we had more money available to contribute. We gave a gift when we had a lot more money, and we've never stopped giving. Versus a loyal subscriber saying we gave about 25 years ago when they needed to be supported. We increased our giving 15 years ago when we retired. We gave a gift in 2011, and actually these people cut back because of the economy. So when we analyzed all of that data, this is very similar to what I was talking about with ticket buying, in that donations sort of have these ebbs and flows with what's going on in people's lives as well. So why they first donated, the blue is sort of the primary reasons that popped up. Again, it was about supporting. It's the right thing to do. I feel like they needed it. And then other issues came up to support the arts in general, that sort of thing. The point of the most common answer of when did you start giving more was actually when I could afford to. It was when I felt like I had money, when I got an increase in salary, I got a real job, I had fewer expenses, that's, the tuition's gone, that sort of thing. A point of major gifts, estate planning, again, a life stage thing. We're thinking about our next stage, was very important there. And the point of cutting back and stopping was the most common were loss of income, retirement, that sort of thing. But again, things like college tuition, household expenses. And all of this sort of suggests that we really need to spend more time thinking about people and where they are in their life stage, appending data to the data we have so we know what's happening in their lives and can better tailor giving and ask to that. So back to the benefits thing, we asked people, we gave people a whole bunch of benefits that we use, right, and said, rate these on a scale from highly motivating to personally meaningless. There's a lot of blue down in the bottom there. And what's interesting is what's on the top, what rises to the top, are all concert-related factors. Yes, okay, free tickets, that would be the best. Or discounted tickets, or no service fee, but also comp tickets to rehearsals, preferred seating sections, access to seating sections, advanced ticket purchases, complimentary CDs, so I can hear. So they're all about the music, getting to more concerts, hearing more music. And if you look at the bottom end, so, $75, what do you give people? Their name in the program book and the newsletter, right? And the other thing that's interesting down at the lower end is donor-only receptions, access to donor-only lounges, access to donor dining. These also generally held across all clusters and levels of giving. So even those people who, say for instance, people who are donating $5,000 or more, they were much more interested in access to preferred seating and advanced ticket purchases than they were the sort of donor-only benefits. And it really does sort of suggest, rethinking that what we give to people and the more I give, and holding back, we often hold back concert and connections to musicians and that sort of thing until you're really at a high level. And this sort of suggests rethinking all of that, right? Okay. Oh, that's good. So this says, so the last point is purposefully planning for revenue replacement. This goes back to that first ugly chart where we saw extreme patrons and loyal subscribers account for the vast majority of the revenue, and those groups are 60 to 65 on average in terms of years of age. So we really do have to plan purposely now for that replacement. Going back to where we started, are there pathways? Well, yes, there are. And we can actually see what these pathways are. You can see how people got to where they did if you look at the data. And just as one example, you know, those loyal donors, they didn't pop out of anywhere. They had a history with you. They were loyal subscribers, and then they became loyal donors. So if we know this, then we can literally say, okay, let's build very specific maintenance and migration strategies to take people along these paths, right? So we're bringing people in from the classical music world, people who like classical music. Targeting young adults isn't right. It's targeting young adults who like classical music. But motivating to bring in, obviously, that frequency and tenure to migrate the uncommitted buyers up. For instance, really thinking about those top 2 segments and saying those loyal subscribers, how do we move them up or move them over to loyal donors, not lapsed subscribers, you know, when they can no longer attend. The groups will talk more about this in a minute. I think one of the challenges to doing this is how we think internally. And this is sort of a mental model, if you will. You know, we have the marketing department thinking about subscribers and single ticket buyers all on behalf of the product, and development is over there courting donors and funders all for the product to support the product. And that happens through the entire organization. And I think if we sort of turn that around and think about it, putting the patron at the center of our organizations and building cross-functionally around that to foster connections to the concerts, the brand, and to the classical music community, we get far further in building those relationships. I think we spent a fair amount of time working on those connections to concerts, but I think particularly the connections to the brand and the musical community and the classical music community are fairly weak and have lots of room for growth. I'm not going to go into those details because we're running out of time, but I think just to sort of summarize then, this work would say that if we want to increase lifetime value, then we need to drive attendance or frequency because it leads to longer tenure, and can accelerate giving at any tenure level. Both frequency and tenure lead to donations, not just revenue, but to donations and therefore greater revenue. We need to compel people to come because if we don't compel them, they won't. And we need to compel them to come and pay a reasonable price. I think it's about value added rather than value pricing here. And we have to ensure extreme satisfaction because that's when they're going to come back. We have to focus fanatically on brand relationships. Significantly greater value comes from the patrons who feel that they're in partnership with you and they feel like they're valued by orchestras. I think orchestras really need to consider more patron-relevant donor strategies, strategies that focus heavily on support, treat benefits as tokens of appreciation, rethink that hierarchical give and get model, and maybe it's more of surprise and delight instead, and really look at benefits that align with, better align with patron lifestyles, interests, and brand connections. Putting the patron at the core, as we just talked about, and really purposefully trying to develop strategies to move people where you want to go together in the future. Thank you.
EDs 5 to 6, we should leave now. We have another session called 12. We'll just get our panelists up on the platform and let's find out what's happening with that data and how pre-officers in the study are beginning to apply this.
Yeah, I guess I will.
Water.
Okay.
I get back. I know, I have to go up actually on a little personal business. I'm just going to try to squeeze a long weekend out of it. Then I'll be back in September.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's so many chairs up here.
I know. How are you, Robin? I've been working on this for a year and a half. I've been on the committee with David for a year and a half on the patron growth. Now let me go.
You're going first, aren't you?
Don't even go there, Robin. I know. It's like walking a tightrope. I said to David today, I don't, it's a good day, I give you an hour and back and forth conversation to 4 hours until I'm finished. I know. It's a little difficult.
I think Kevin's there.
Are you going to sit up here too? Yes. Awesome. There's way too many chairs.
How many bodies are there?
I think there's only 4 of us, right?
Great.
Okay, let's take our seats, please, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to carry on. We've got 3 short presentations. Hey, folks, settle down, please. Please take your seats. We want to move on because we want to give you some time for questions. But remember, the Group 1 and 2 marketing and development folks have a whole hour on this with Kate tomorrow for a deeper dive. So let's prioritize questions from some of the smaller orchestras, but we'll take as many as we can later. Kevin from Chicago is going to kick off with the first presentation.
Thank you. And I want to echo comments that were made earlier about the work that Kate has done on this. It is an understatement to say the data analysis and research done in this was a gargantuan task. I saw the data files and the millions and millions of records that she had to parse through to get at this, and it really has delivered, as you can see, really quite fascinating results. And you know, the frequency results, I think we all knew we were going to go down that path. We were going to see the relationship. But what was really fascinating for me was to see the product positioning and the brand relationship map and how people actually perceive their relationships to us, because in the end, that's what it's all about. And we have been talking about this actually in Chicago for a while now, coming out of the Churn study, because we knew that it wasn't just about ticket buying, it was about the complete relationship that we have with our patrons, and we actually have made nurturing a lifelong patron relationship part of our strategic imperatives for the institution. We have 4 strategic imperatives, I won't go through them all, but at the center of it all is nurturing a lifelong patron relationship, and how do we do that? So, and we've been doing some other data analysis, and the John Elliott group had done some work for us looking at how ticket buying and giving are related, and also quantifying risk for changing some strategies and quantifying opportunities for innovation or growth. And I'm just going to show you a couple of slides that basically echo a lot of what Kate said. I do it because, well, they're fun to watch. So what this slide basically looks at, what we were trying to do at the Chicago Symphony is look at not only the last 5 or 10 years worth of transactional data, but looking back over 20 years in ticket buying and giving behavior. And what you see here is the number of purchases from left to right, 1 to 7+, and you see basically a sales factor. So how their factor of the propensity to buy more, or the dollar revenue that is associated with them as a patron. And you see, obviously, as you go more frequency, they're worth more to us. But getting to Kate's point about the trailing factor for patrons for giving, this is the giving factor, the gift factor over that same period. Now, these are patrons who bought between the 04-05 season and the 09-10 season. So they are newer to us, and you can see that there is a trailing factor. And again, frequency does relate to giving. But then we looked, okay, so how about people who purchased from 1998 until 03-04? And you can see their sales factor is going up. So again, this is where tenure and longevity starts to play into a broader relationship. But again, you have in the gift factor a trailing factor. Again, it takes a longer time to build up the motivation to give. And then we said, well, let's go back even further and see what we can find. And this is where you have those patrons who are coming for a long time, and particularly those people who are coming a lot during the year, and there's their giving factor. And that's that extreme patron that Kate so clearly identified. So then we went in and said, well, how can we actually identify what's the value of these people? And I'm not going to go through this chart. It's insane. I wouldn't even try. But what we really analyzed our data to get a sense of people who came, their first purchase was in the 2004-05 season. What happened to them over the next 60 months? And how can you look at the relationship factor that's built of those people who stay with you over time have a greater propensity to be more involved in the organization, they're worth more to you, and they have a greater propensity to give. And this trend was consistent over single ticket buyers, weekly buyers, as well as subscribers. What it did tell us is we were able to show that the new people were not really giving money. They weren't giving money. And it was such a small amount of money that they were giving, but we were calling 5,000 households multiple times to try and get new people to give. Similarly, subscriptions. We were not selling a lot of subscriptions to these people, but we were calling them, those 5,000 households, multiple times to marry us after their first date that we talked about in the Churn study. And so what are we doing with all of this data? From the study that, this study that I just showed you here, the excerpts from, and Kate's study, has really helped us focus on relationship. And so I've been working, my whole department has been working very much with our entire development department. And we have regular meetings where we've been talking about how do we cross over the relationship? How do we not just focus on we're the ticket people and you're the giving people? So we started to look at shared benefits. And so, we're still not down the path where we can say, well, we're going to give up all the benefits. We know that they're maybe not as important, but we're not going to give them all up. But how do we take some things that we normally save for the most select few who are donating a certain amount and start to introduce them to other people based on where they are in their life cycle that Kate's data was showing where they are in that path? So, for example, open rehearsals have often been used primarily as a donor benefit. Why don't we take somebody who's maybe new in the relationship and offer that to them, saying thank you. It's normally for donors of X level, but we want to thank you for being part of the CSO family. So what, in general, we're trying to do is find the points in the relationship to try and reinforce the relationship, to accelerate the relationship, essentially over the long haul. So one example are the open rehearsals. Another example are salon series, where we have artists having chats with our donors. And we never use every seat that we have available for them. We usually have about an extra 100 seats. So now development is giving us basically a certain amount of capacity that we can then use to find key patrons, whatever their relationship. It may not be donating at the level you're normally required to get there. And it may be somebody that they're going to solicit potentially for an increased gift. How do we do those things? Well, one other thing, Liz Medea, our director of marketing, is here. We worked with development, and she came up with the concept of benefit of the month, because benefits can get very stagnant. So why don't we try and have things that are fresh all the time? So you may not have a list of things that you're going to get, but there's a whole menu of things that we can offer. And then when we send something to somebody saying, here's what's available to you this month, it's something new as opposed to something that just sits on our website that somebody can go to and access regularly to see what they get for that giving level. We also found a sweet spot in our data where there was a gap between people who gave at $100 versus people who were giving over $300. And there was a huge gap and a lot of households in that $100 level that weren't increasing their gift. Well, we did an analysis to look at what's the thing people want. And you saw from Kate's data, fees are a big sticking point. So we have free exchanges for anyone over 10 who buys more than 10 concerts in their package. So why don't we take anyone who's a subscriber of 5 concerts and wipe out their exchange fees if they give at the $3 level, at the $300 level? And so what we have found is that the risk, the amount of money we were losing in exchange fees isn't anywhere near what we're gaining from people who are willing to take just that little bit more commitment step. And it makes them feel like they're in a better relationship with us. The final thing that I'll share before I pass it on to my colleagues is that we also feel it's absolutely critical to find people at the point where they're really enjoying the experience to reinforce that relationship. So what we're going to be doing more of, and this is going to take some resources to figure out how we're going to do this, but through access control, we know who's coming in the house at any time. I also know what tickets are sold in the house. I know if I have an empty box and maybe there's a donor that we want to increase their gift. Take them out of a seat that maybe I could sell for a walk-up, or if it's unused, just ask them and offer them a free box for the night and just say it's a thank you. Maybe it's a new person who's just coming in for the first time. Here are a couple of drinks on us. But it's by identifying them in advance in the data, flagging their accounts, and then somebody on staff having something, having their handheld device that says, so-and-so just walked in. I go and I meet them at their seats, say, thank you, welcome, here's a drink, here's some free parking, which in Chicago people will kill for. And using your inventory smartly so that you can encourage people to again, accelerate the relationship. So that's where we are now, and hopefully we'll share long stories about how successful we've been, but we also know that this is a long tail. There's a long lifetime to this. So we don't know if we'll be able to measure right away the success, but what we feel we're doing is positive in our relationship, and it doesn't really have to pay off right away. Okay?
Great. Kevin, thank you very much. And I'm really glad we have a development director here who's going to give us some thoughts from the development side of this equation. Judith Helf from the York Philharmonic.
Thank you. Can I ask, how many development people are in the audience today? Oh, more than I thought. Wow. Why aren't you back home chasing your goals? Hopefully this will help. All of us here are in the business of encouraging concert attendance and selling tickets. But for most orchestras, as my colleagues in development and all of us know, ticket sales often represent less than half of our operating expenses, with development having to raise the greater portion. This can make for a tricky balance between marketing and development departments. Where are our priorities? What are the rules of engagement? In my opinion, the most important breakthrough to come out of the PGI study is that it served to bring marketing and development to the table together. Not only to share data, but to come to terms with the fact that we're both talking to the same audience, and that audience relates to us not as marketing or development, but in our case, it's the New York Philharmonic. So our message to them has to be clear. We want to build a relationship with you, first as a concert attendee, then as a frequent attendee, and then we want to deepen that relationship, bringing you into the donor family, where greater privileges may be enjoyed as a tribute to your generosity and your love of the organization. And while all orchestras are facing challenges in the current market, we in New York face a particular challenge because there are so many choices for the public to select from. A huge portion of our audience, 76%, have attended only once. And this statistic provides an important confirmation of the Churning study, but with the addition of the donor data from the PGI study, it becomes easier to see the big picture. The PGI study made a point that there is a relationship between donating and frequency of attendance. According to the study, 4% of one-time attendees give. In our case, it's more around 6%. 27% of newer subscribers give, and 68% of core subscribers give. And the finding is that donations can be initiated earlier in the attendee's life cycle if they attend more concerts. We learned frequency trumps longevity. One thing I just need to keep in mind, and folks who've been on the PGI group with me all year have heard me say this before, there just simply are people who are philanthropic and people who are not. So that's just something we have to deal with. Or they may be supporting their college or other causes that we're not aware of. So there is that. But the model is all about building relationships with our donors. We in development have always known this. But now, as a result of the PGI study, particularly the increased collaboration between our departments, marketing has decided at the Philharmonic to build stronger connections with audience members, strategizing that if the attendee feels closer to us, they will not only buy tickets, but they'll be more likely to respond favorably when we do ask them to join our donor family. So to manage this initiative, the first thing we've done is we've created a new position at the Philharmonic, a director of relationship marketing. And marketing's always known that it's all about relationships. Getting attendees to subscribe is a perfect example of building relationships. But up until now, we lack the resources to tackle relationship building outside of the development department in a really meaningful way. So now with the position in place, and particularly with greater collaboration across departments, things are starting to happen. So here are just a few of the things that we are beginning to put in place. For first-time attendees, we're mailing welcome kits that include things such as a seat map of the hall, restroom locations, tips on parking, restaurants. We're experimenting with volunteer greeters who are going to meet first-timers in the lobby and escort them to their seats, help them learn their way around, answer any questions they might have. We're about to start experimenting with that very soon. Following their first concert, we're emailing attendees a survey simply to ask them how they like the concert, all engagement techniques. And we're then following up with an offer to return, and we're going to test several incentives to see what works best. For core subscribers, we're shooting video interviews, actually, with 50-year-plus subscribers, and we've identified more than 200 of them. We're going to show them on our website and in the hall, and we'll use the audio during intermission during our radio broadcasts. We're creating a subscriber appreciation month. We're going to offer one-time discounts on memberships in the Friends program. We've never done that before. We're going to experiment with that. Merchandise discounts and some other benefits. And, it's a fine line. We do have to continue to ensure the exclusivity of privileges that are particularly held for our higher level donors, but it's an experiment that we're anxious to embark on. And for our audience in general, just to show that good ideas come from many sources, we stole an idea from the Bismarck-Mandan, North Dakota Symphony. We invited audience members to write little personal Post-it notes to Emanuel Axe on the occasion of his 100th concert very recently. It was a terrific involvement device. We got back over 600 responses. And we're looking into setting up an online community for audience members and donors to meet, to discuss concerts, share experiences, and receive special content. And we're making a concerted effort to engage in some real cross-pollination for the first time by actively promoting becoming a part of the donor community of friends and patrons in most of our marketing materials with redesigned pages, inserts, and more. We're going to be testing many ideas going forward to forge and cement these relationships, but it's not the particulars as much as the fact that these ideas grew from collaboration and the recognition that, again, our prospects don't think of us as the marketing department and the development department. The PGI study highlighted the fact that there are compelling reasons for marketing and development departments to work together more collaboratively than we have in the past. Not having been involved in the earlier churn studies, I was kind of intrigued by the title that was given, Churning Butter into Gold. It couldn't help but remind me of Rumpelstiltskin, even though the mediums were a little different. So it reminded me of a fairy tale. And we are looking forward to looking back on these efforts this time next year and hopefully sharing with you the reports of significant successes and hopefully marketing and development living happily ever after. Okay, thanks. Hey, thank you. This was really a tremendous piece of work. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Let's go straight to LA.
All right.
Shana.
Thanks. Can everyone hear me okay? So I have to echo what Kevin and New York Philharmonic has said about creating this common language between development and marketing. Right, so I don't know if you guys share in not having that common language or that sort of ongoing dialogue between the two departments, but I think that even if you don't see eye to eye on everything, or maybe you do have a good relationship, I think that this study has really created that kind of 360-degree patron perspective that is really, really essential. And so that's a great launching pad for any organization to work with. So I have a few areas where we've really benefited from this. And I think to Kate's point about the magnitude of this study, I think she'll speak for the fact that LA was really a monster when it came to our data challenges. So the PGI study required a comprehensive database with both ticketing and donation information. And the difficulty that we had in providing this information to Kate for the study to get this 360-degree view of our patrons it really highlighted the challenges of the fact that we have these disparate CMS systems in our organization. And it's really fueled our current search, system search right now, and marketing and development are working in a great partnership to solve this problem. But the great thing is that now we have a 360-degree view of our patrons, thanks to Kate, which you would think for an organization of our size that we should have automatically. The second thing is we've really revised our telesales and telefunding strategy, and great thanks to my colleague Nora Brady, who I work with, who works very closely with her counterpart in the development department to ongoingly look at how we can improve our telesales and telefunding campaigns. The first thing we've done is we've created joint calls. So we have a stronger donation script language that we've included in some of our subscription calls. We have eliminated trialists in our telefunding campaign, which some of my colleagues have done as well. We've increased the filtering and the elimination of unproductive leads in telesales. So constantly examining what's working and what's not working. And then, like I was saying, there's a much more aligned communication between the staff. So, for example, we're looking at first-year subscribers and what might be the most optimal timing within their subscription experience for when we approach them with donation appeals. So right now we function on a typical telesales and then telefunding cycle, but actually a first-time subscriber might not have even come into the hall yet and experienced their first concert before they're called with a telefunding appeal. So we have to be very cognizant of when we approach people that they're actually attending, that they're actually showing up in their seats for their first concert. The next thing is that, LA, in comparison to the other orchestras in the study, has the largest group of first-year subscribers and one-time ticket buyers. And we have the lowest percent of donating ticket buyers. So this is due to a number of things. We've had a lot of new stuff going on in LA, right? We had a new hall, we have a new music director, and I think that brings in a considerable amount of new people ongoingly. But that makes our attrition is much higher as a result. So one of the things that we're doing there is we're including more donation language. We're being more cognizant of where we include donation language. So in all of our ticketing communications, subscription tickets, we have placing a greater emphasis on web donating opportunities. And we've increased the commission rate in DCM's campaign, increased the commission rate for telesales callers who bring in add-on donations. So that's been an effective way to kind of going back to even the joint call note that I made earlier. What this also means is that we have an even stronger or more serious brand relationship issue. So I know Kate said that this is something that is across all of the participating orchestras, but we have, as you may or may not know, a more disparate brand structure with our two venues, Walt Disney Concert Hall and the Hollywood Bowl, and then sort of the mother brand, LA Phil. And so that relationship, bringing people into the organization and creating that relationship is even more of a challenge. So this is continuing to increase this higher attrition, and we have a greater number of new-to-file and trialist patrons as a result, and a lower amount of donor subscribers, as we noted before. So we're responding in a couple of ways. We have a more robust loyalty and retention plan underway to increase the satisfaction. And some of the efforts are, we're looking at subscribers and lower level donor benefits to hone in on the most meaningful perks. And I think Kevin brought up that, and similar to what CSO is doing, we're looking at things like rehearsal access or meet the musician events that are very important to all music lovers, no matter what point they're in, and where is the right time to introduce those benefits. We're looking at doing subscriber appreciation events for both first-year and fourth-year subscribers. Those are the two trigger points within the subscription where people tend to drop off. So we all know that about first-year subscribers, but our fourth-year subscribers is another very sensitive point. We're doing welcome emails for new patrons as they come into the organization to inform them about the brand. I think this is going to lead to the frequency conversation, and also will set them up to understand what the donation opportunities are. And then what we've been doing for a while is soliciting ongoing feedback from our customers. I think they feel more involved in the process. This is through surveying that we do annually, we do regularly for each venue. The other thing too, we found, oh sorry, I pressed the wrong button. Subscribers, they don't donate because, or we have a lower percentage of subscribers that donate because they don't perceive the LA Phil as being needy. You know, and one of the things that we found through more examination is that education, music education, and the community outreach that we do is extremely important to these loyal patrons, and that information needs to be more front and center in order for people to feel a connection, that their subscription and a donation is really a part of something that's larger. And that's also part of building the brand relationship. Finally, you know, we've learned a lot from LA Phil Live, you know, from our in movie theater series. And I don't know if any of you have attended, but you'll see that there's quite a bit of program information and in-depth kind of information prior to the pieces beginning about the concert experience, or about the pieces that are being performed. And people have really noted how much they appreciate that kind of in-depth information. It draws them into the piece, it draws them into the experience. And so we're really thinking about, well, how do we make that a more commonplace thing? Why should that just be reserved for LA Phil Live and for the movie theater audience? This is something that really, truly enhances the connection. And as Kate pointed out, as the study points out, the concert experience is what really is going to keep people coming back. So that is something that we're brainstorming right now. So these are just some of the highlights, and I think we're happy to take any questions on the matter.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Okay, we've got about 4 or 5 minutes left. Are there any burning questions for Kate, the panel, for Jack? We do have a deep... Yes, one at the back. Come up to the mic, please, and tell us who you are, Scott.
I'm Scott Harrison, Detroit Symphony. So I guess the question is for everyone, but really mostly for Kate. And I'm thinking about the comment from this morning that we all have to be very careful about the pitfalls of benchmarking and just sort of taking something in whole and saying, well, that was an answer here, so it's going to work there. Obviously, I think what this says to us is a lot of us need to do our own data work, how important that is. But if that's a longer-term goal, or at least one that takes a more resource-intensive goal, can you suggest sort of small steps or small lessons that we can draw from this to start to personalize the situation to examining our own operations?
I think that, yes, there are usually sort of market-specific differences. You know, I do work with lots of orchestras, and large and small, but I think this really suggested there are, in some cases, really macro things going on. You know, so for instance, that's the chart about the programming, interesting classical periods. If I had overlaid the 9 orchestras, it would be one big line. They were exactly the same. You know, so we saw some little differences in terms of smaller markets were a little more interested in entertainment, and larger markets a little more intellectually curious. But on the whole, there was very little difference between what's going on here. So I think you have to look at this in the overall sense first, and then look at the data with respect to what you do, you know, and say, what can we learn? Look at our benefit structure, for instance, and look what this says and start to use it. I mean, you obviously, yes, you should be able to hopefully do your own work, but I think this gives a lot of direction that, that you can use and start to start thinking about things. And I think particularly what these people are already doing, you know, in terms of suggestions. So I think it's more macro than micro in this case.
Jack.
Just to add one thing to that, Detroit is a budget that's larger than a lot of the people in this room as well. There are a couple of orchestras that have heard about some of the initial findings of this that are much smaller in budget size, and they're picking small pieces of that off that look like they relate to their customers. And one quick example, Pensacola was looking at people who, when not renewing, said, I can't come anymore because I can't drive at night. Well, that's somebody that's ready to migrate from loyal to subscriber to loyal donor, because they're not going to be at the, so they were sending copies of a CD of the performance to those people saying, sorry you can't be here, but we want you to enjoy the music. And then they're going to follow up now with a concerted donor effort to those people who are at a point in their life stage where they may be ready to make a significant gift, or at least a regular gift for a while, that was never paid attention to before because they weren't thought of as a category of the market.
Sure.
If I can add something too, I think getting into your own data is absolutely critical. You know, that $300 sweet spot that we found was not from this study. It was just going in and saying, okay, you know, we did an extract from Tessitura, and here were the giving levels, here number of patrons in that level versus this level, and let's see if we can find something to move people up. So finding the sweet spots, I think, we're all going to have to do individually, and that's where I think you create the best strategies around it.
Question on the back.
Hi, my name is Greg Heltman from Santa Fe, New Mexico. My question is, in your research, was there anything shown that would demonstrate more than a casual relationship? In other words, over the years, we have been asking our subscribers, our ticket buyers, to donate, and yet we see the trailing results from attendance and frequency. Is there tangible evidence that we can change that result through any activity that we are endeavoring to do as we discuss this? Or is this more of a casual relationship than a causative relationship?
I think when you look at those most committed patrons, particularly the ones who are giving, and you read their descriptions of the relationship and what they like, and people would write paragraphs or pages about that. And I think it really is very much about feeling connected and inside the organization. Those things that connect them to the faces of the brand, be it the musicians, the management, the orchestra, making them feel like they know who those musicians are on the stage. It was all of those very sort of personal things that they would relate to that really made them feel, I think, more loyal, more committed. So I think it's that sort of information that moves you along.
And I think that might be a bit of an explanation for why it takes 30, 40 years, because if you let it happen naturally, eventually people develop a relationship with you. You know, after 40 years, they finally felt part of it. So the big finding for me here is you can accelerate that by treating them as if they're important earlier, rather than waiting for them to discover it after 40 years.